Hello there. Please can I welcome everyone to this meeting of the Health and Environment Policy Committee taking place in the Walton Suite, Winchester Guildhall. The time is 6:30. My name is Councillor Steve Cremoyson. I'm chair of this meeting. This meeting is being live streamed and recorded to the Council's YouTube channel. Subtitles are available and advice on how to turn this on is set out on our website. If I could ask everyone to please ensure that your mobile phones are on silent one way or another. In the unlikely event that it is necessary to evacuate the building, the fire alarm will sound, and please follow all instructions given to you by our team. And can I welcome the members of the public and visiting councillors to the meeting. I'll invite you forward when it is time for you to make your contribution. Now I'll just turn over to the agenda. And start with item 1, which is, excuse me, apologies and deputies. So, Claire, do you have any apologies or deputies noted?
Thank you, Chair. No apologies for absence have been received. However, I believe Councillor Tippett Cooper may be arriving late. Thank you.
Thank you, Claire. Yes, I think John will arrive in a couple of minutes and he'll be up here with me. Second item on the agenda is declarations of interest. That's really from the councillors around the table. I'm not expecting any from those present, but it's okay. Right, that's good. No declarations of interest. Moving on to item 3, which is chair announcements. So I'll keep my comments brief in the interest of time. At the last meeting, there was a work item put forward to this committee by Councillor Wallace on behalf of Councillor Lee. This has been considered by officers and the portfolio holder, and as a consequence of the motion of the nature emergency, which was passed by council only yesterday evening, I would consider that this work item is now resolved. And I'll just look for a nod from Councillor Wallace, who's at the back. So he's sort of giving a nod and a shake, which I suspect means it's partially resolved. Thank you, Councillor Wallace. And if I could just welcome Councillor John Tippett Cooper up here and Councillor Warwick to the meeting.
Apologies, Chairman, for being late. It's like being at school, isn't it?
And if I could just ask for the customary declaration of interest, Councillor Warwick.
I would like to make the personal non-prejudicial comment that I'm a Hampshire County Councillor, and I'm also a member of the Leisure Centre, so I don't know if that counts as an interest, but I can see that's on the agenda later on. Thank you.
Thank you. Sorry, Councillor Tippett Cooper, you have a declaration of interest?
Indeed, in relation to the cost of living paper, just to make the committee aware that I'm a volunteer director at Unit 12, KIC.
Thank you. Moving on to the minutes, I will in a minute ask that members here can confirm they are all good with these minutes, but I'll just make a few comments related to those, sort of extending on my chair announcements, and note that we've all had an opportunity. From those minutes, you will see there were various items which we raised in a kind of semi-brainstorming session at the end, including requests for updates on CNAP, the carbon neutral plan and so on. We've had an opportunity to have an update briefing on CNAP earlier this week, and this may well inform some of our questions and comments when we get to the Winchester Movement Strategy later. We also asked for an update on the strategy for toilet upgrades, and as it turned out, that was already in hand and a plan was approved by Cabinet. And it also featured in the Hampshire Chronicle, which didn't disappoint us, with the headline, "Civic Chiefs Spend a Pretty Penny," or something like that. Disappointingly, the Prime Minister announcements yesterday appear to put at risk the funding for the new rationalised waste management system that our teams in the City Council, City and the County Council have been working on and that this committee advised on in terms of policy advice at the last meeting. So we'll await and see what follows on next from that. So that concludes my comments. And in relation to the minutes, can I just check that we're all good with the minutes? Looking round, nods. Thank you. We're good with those, Claire. Thank you. Right. Moving on to item 5, which is public participation and as members of the public and any visiting councillors. As far as I know, there are none that want to speak at this moment, but I think Councillor Wallace has asked to speak ahead of item 7, which is the CNAP report, and item, I think, I'm not sure, just bear with me a second, and item 8, which is the social value. 6. Okay. Item 6, cost of living programme. We're doing a great miming exercise there at the back, Councillor. What is right then, so with that in mind, let's move on to item 6, which is the cost of living programme. I'll invite Steve Lincoln and Melissa Fletcher to the front. And have we got Councillor Lerny? Now, Councillor Wallace, do you want to make your comments before they speak or after they speak? I'm happy for you to do it after. I'll hand it over to Councillor, sorry, not Councillor Lerny, Councillor Becker. I apologise.
No, that's all right. And sorry, I've got a whole suite of people here today, which I think highlights the importance, the ongoing importance of the cost of living crisis to this council. So just by way of introduction, I'm sure you know all their lovely faces, but we have Melissa Fletcher, Steve Lincoln and Sarah Wallace. So Sarah's from the housing team, and this is very much a cross-party, a cross-council area of work. So I'm really happy to present this paper today. This paper is an update of the ongoing cost of living support that has been provided and continues to be provided by this council. In 2021, just as we were coming out of the incredibly difficult COVID times, the country began to suffer an economic crisis, and that continues to have a serious impact on everyday living costs for everybody. To alleviate and address these concerns and to address these cost increases, the council reacted quickly to help residents and organisations such as Unit 12, as Councillor Tippett-Cooper's already alluded to, with increased costs and the increased economic uncertainty. The paper has a dual purpose. It looks back at the interventions and support that have been given since September 2022, but it also very importantly looks forward to the future. Just as the cost of living crisis isn't over, nor is the support of the council, it does still remain one of our very key priorities. As you'll note from the paper, in September 2022, £200,000 was allocated to enable delivery of intensive support for 6 months, with a further £60,000 being made available in February 2023 to extend the programme for a further 6 months. The purpose of the funding was to be intensive and short term. It's always intended to be a one-off payment to help individuals and organisations get through the most acute period of the crisis, as well as adapting to the increased costs over a longer time. Since September 2022, the council has also used this time to adapt its ongoing services and delivery to make sure that it can continue to prioritise assisting residents and organisations with the ongoing crisis. The ongoing support of the council continues under the original objectives of the programme. So those were to help residents access support quickly and easily. To do this, Citizens Advice continues to be the highest funded organisation through the Council's grant programme. It continues to offer amazing support services and has been able to improve its outreach services through the additional funding provided by the Council. Those outreach services do continue. The additional funding has also allowed the Citizens Advice team to train staff in other organisations so that they can become more knowledgeable about where clients may go for help, whether that is to Citizens Advice or to other support services, so residents can access support more quickly. second aim of the programme was to provide extra support for the most vulnerable residents. So in addition to continuing to distribute government funding as and when it becomes available, and so that has been provided to date through the Housing Support Fund and food vouchers from the County Council. Thank you, Councillor Warwick. Winchester City Council continues to provide real financial help through housing benefits, council tax reduction scheme, discretionary housing payments, and the continued existence and success of the Exceptional Hardship Fund. The council recognises that the impact the crisis has had on tenants being able to afford to pay rent and to live good and healthy lives. So the housing team continues to assist residents with budget advice, to provide emergency food, and I understand that's both through actual food and food vouchers. The giving of fuel vouchers to residents as well. Provides a welfare fund that assists with the purchase and provision of whiteware and furniture. It also recognises the impact that economic uncertainty can have on mental health. So the housing team also collaborate with the local NHS to ensure that residents are able to access the health support that they need, including mental health support. To help residents cut carbon and reduce energy bills, the council continues to undertake a retrofit programme of existing council homes, as well as delivering low energy new homes, such as the housing company flats at Winnell, which we heard about last night. The ongoing programme also aims to make it easy for residents to find and access information. So the council has developed a cost of living web page, which is available. It's one of the first things that you see on the council web page as you come across it. That page continues to be kept up to date and will continue to be kept up to date. So residents can always find the latest information reflecting the situation as it currently stands and the support that is currently available at this time. We continue to work with partners to maximise joint impact. We have a fantastic grant scheme that's open to organisations that support people who are feeling the impact of the cost of living situation and provides funding to such organisations. One of the biggest ongoing support efforts is the establishment of the Social Inclusion Partnership, which had its seed in the Cost of Living Summit that the council held in November 2022. We actually had a meeting of the Social Inclusion Partnership yesterday, which I attended. So many members of the summit who attended the summit in this room in 2022 are now members of the Social Inclusion Partnership. So that discussion and that dialogue continues to bring those organisations together to address the impact of the cost of living situation as well as wider inclusion goals. So I will stop speaking now and I will pass over to Steve and Melissa, who was probably going to reiterate quite a lot of that.
Thanks, Councillor Becker. No, I won't reiterate it. I'll just embellish a little bit of the information. In terms of the paper, as you say, it sets out the support that's been provided and how it will continue to be provided, along with the 5 key objectives that we have delivered and continue to deliver on. One of the achievements out of the piece of work that we've done was the summit that we ran last November, which brought together many stakeholders and was a very positive event and helped us feed into the way that the SIP was formed. And that's something that will continue to grow, and we'll work with the social inclusion team to continue with that, talking about debate and collaboration, because that was one of the key areas of focus that came out of the summit. In terms of the financial support that we provided and the emergency grant funding, we gave around £60,000 to organisations that have supported over 5,000 vulnerable residents across a range of beneficiaries, which was really important for us, and those people that were heavily impacted by the cost of living crisis. As Councillor Becker alluded to, we also gave some additional practical support from Citizens Advice and used financial support to strengthen their resources, which also strengthens their business case going forward to help residents in the future. So that was a very positive piece of work. It increased their capacity for 2 days a week, and like I say, it's increased their business case for funding going forward from other organisations. Another area of work which we continue to work on is around the social media campaign, which will be starting again on the cost of living. Will finish around the end of February next year, and as part of that grant campaign, we'll highlight the outcomes and the impacts from the emergency grant fund, because we need to tell people about the good work that we've done and continue to do, because that work will continue as well. Another area of our work, which was a little bit different to the usual stuff that I do, was around the Family Fun Fridays, which was really well received. I attended a couple of them. A lot of the people attending had multiple children, and they found it really difficult in the summer holidays to find low cost or reasonable entertainment for their children. So this was a really good way of them accessing a day out or having some fun. And actually, the day in Abbey Gardens, when it was sunny, had about 400 people at one point. It was very busy. I spoke to quite a lot of parents who said that they found it was really entertaining, and also they were amazed it was a free event. They don't get very many free events to attend, especially when they were queuing up for the face painting and using the circus skills equipment, which was a bit of a hazard for me, but it was fun for them. The other thing that we're doing is providing financial support to the Winchester Jobs Fair in November, and we're doing an increase in the focus on cost of living and looking at including benefit maximisation in work benefits and promoting the Access to Work programme. So for those with disabilities, to help them back into the workplace. So there's a little bit of an additional focus on the cost of living at our November Jobs Fair. Something else that I've been working on with the housing team, which I haven't put in the paper because we didn't finalise it before the paper was written, is that we're working with the housing team. They have a furniture store project pilot, which is happening at the moment. So we're going to support tenants on low incomes or those in financial need who need to access repurposed or reused items. So that's something we're continuing to help with. And also continuing the work with the housing social inclusion team with vulnerable tenants, working on a programme of support to alleviate hunger in October for children and families, looking at cooking sessions in the sheltered housing scheme and looking at providing some items for cooking and keeping warm this winter. So there's still some continuing work in terms of the social inclusion partnership and the social inclusion team that we're continuing working with. These additional schemes have been put in place and we'll be working with partners in the forthcoming months. And in terms of the paper, as you can see, the information outlined that the cost of living continues to be an enhanced priority for the council and its residents, and the principles set out initially to be incorporated in everything that the council does. And that was all I wanted to add. Thank you. Steve, did you want?
Thank you, Melissa, and thank you, Councillor Becker. That sounds pretty comprehensive report. Right, I'll open the floor up to, sorry, Councillor Wallace. There's a good reason why maybe we should go with you first. We're less likely to forget. So if you could take a place and come and make your points.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, as we know, residents have been hit hard by the cost of living crisis. I was just looking up a few facts earlier on. Across the UK, the Trussell Trust food banks provided almost 3 million emergency food parcels to people facing hardship in the last year, with more than 1 million of those parcels provided for children. This is the most parcels that the charity have ever distributed in a single year, and is a 37% year-on-year increase, with 760,000 people using a food bank in the Trussell Trust for the first time. Similar increases have been reported in local food banks. For example, the Meon Valley Food Bank reported an 85% increase in households helped in the past year, and overall a threefold increase in the past 3 years. The council cannot resolve the crisis, but the cost of living programme was put in place to support those residents who were hit hardest. And I'd like to echo the comments that were made in the report and put on record my thanks to the officers for all the work they have done, both those directly involved with the cost of living programme and those from across the council who provided short-term crisis support, including the revenue and benefits team, the housing team, the comms team and the customer service team. Plus, of course, Citizens Advice, who are a very experienced cost of living supporter and troubleshooter organisation who continue to provide invaluable support for some of our residents. I did have one question. Going forward, has there been any consideration for examining the feasibility of a mobile advice service? The woeful public transport between rural villages and citizens advice centres in either Winchester or Bishop's Waltham has made it hard for some of our most vulnerable residents to get face-to-face support. A mobile service that goes out to some of these rural villages may be able to help fill this gap. Perhaps a feasibility study using funds from the Rural Prosperity Fund would be a start. I'd be interested to hear your thoughts. Thank you.
Would you like to take that question now? That sounds like a very good question. Thank you, Councillor Wallace.
Yeah, I'll take that one, Chair. Yeah, thank you, Councillor Wallace. I wouldn't say that specifically a mobile advice service has been discussed or considered, but the work and the funding that we've done with the additional funding for Citizens Advice enabled them to increase their outreach work. So they've taken their services out and about far more. But they've also looked at how they do that. So probably the traditional way of delivering outreach services is to go book a venue, sit there for 2 or 3 hours, promote the fact you're going to be there and hope someone turns up. They took quite a different approach, which was to work much more closely with existing partners and organisations and activities to take themselves to where those people are already gathering. So be it lunch clubs or that kind of activity already happening where the target audience was likely to be the right one. So they've been out and been into a number of those places. It's work that they've sort of established a basis now. So this is one of those kind of legacy pieces that hopefully can continue going forward, that they've established that as a way that they're going to do some of their operation in future. Also the work that I think Councillor Becker mentioned about the way they've upskilled and enabled other organisations who aren't so qualified in offering that kind of detailed advice, but to understand the concepts and the principles behind it and to be able to almost act as a first point of contact. So there hasn't been discussion around a specific mobile service, but the service that probably the key provider, Citizens Advice, offer has gone out in a much more mobile way, making it much more accessible to people. Having said that, it's certainly a conversation we can have. Obviously, we continue, as was mentioned, we continue to fund Citizens Advice significantly. We can have conversations with them, and we intend to have conversations about what they do, how they do it, how best they can continue to respond and react to the challenges that they and their clients are facing. So, thank you.
Can I just add something? They have actually tried that before, and I know that they're looking at something in the future, but they haven't actually kind of, planned how they're going to deliver that. I know it comes with their, issues around how do they get around, how the extra money it will cost in terms of the transport. But I know it's something that I have funded in the past, and just for a short period of time. So we'll continue that conversation with them. Thanks.
Thank you. I think Councillor Tippett Cooper wants to jump in here on an area of specialist expertise.
Well, I'm not at all, Chair, but just to support what Steve and Melissa have said and to help answer Councillor Wallace's question. One of these outreach sessions for the Advice Bureau was at Unit 12, where I was at the beginning. I'm a volunteer director, and what was really positive about that approach, which is, I suppose, a development since the cost of living programme was implemented last year, was that it means that Citizens Advice is going to areas where actually people who may not necessarily realise that service is available is there for them, but also they're going there when they're in potentially in a more financially vulnerable position. Not everyone that attends the food pantry at Unit 12 is financially vulnerable. Most are. And so the fact that Citizens Advice Bureau came and joined us at a session there and want to continue developing that partnership is an example of how they are looking for the right places to go, as it were, where people are, as opposed to sort of, not doing so. And is a perfect example of how I think organisations like Citizens Advice Bureau are being innovative with limited resources that they have in order to make the most impact in the community.
Thank you, Councillor Tippett Cooper. I'm going to open that up to the floor for questions from members, but I have in the queue already Councillor Bolton and then Councillor Warwick. So Councillor Bolton, if you'd like to.
Thank you, Chair. So I had a similar question to Councillor Wallace, but it was essentially that, first of all, great amount of work gone on here, which is to be commended. The thing that sort of leaps out in there is that there's obviously a density of population within the city that's greater, and therefore there's inevitably more focus on that. And I wondered if you could flesh out a bit more on what is being done to try and get to more vulnerable people in rural communities. I hear what Councillor Wallace says about a mobile unit. I was actually I think it's quite a good idea actually. But what I wondered is how much work goes on with the local parishes, because it seems to me that a lot of those vulnerable people in rural communities are actually, they're isolated. They may not have access to the internet. I mean, God knows I've got barely access to the internet at home. So, you know, getting to those people is difficult, finding them, and they're suffering in silence. Local parishes are good at knowing where the problems are or finding out. And I think, and I was curious to know maybe what is happening or what could be done to work more closely there and try and find these vulnerable people that need help. So thank you.
At the very start of this whole piece of work, shortly after the summit happened, we reached out and engaged with all the parish councils. Now, it was, unfortunately, this is no criticism of them, actually, we didn't get a huge take up of that, but we did get some really good quality conversation with a number of the parish councils. I think at that stage, it was quite early in the piece. They definitely gave us a steer, and it helped shape some of the things that we did, and particularly the way that we worked with Citizens Advice and the way that they approached what they did. It's definitely something we can do some more. And I think there is a conversation still to be had again with the parishes. There's, I think through maybe the Social Inclusion Partnership, there's some work that we can do, and also as a standalone piece of work, just to maybe touch base, understand, you know, we're 12 months on, a lot's happened, a lot's changed, but a lot of issues still exist. So there's definitely some further work and conversation we can do with them. I think probably with this time we maybe need to approach them a little bit differently, or kind of reach out and try and maybe just engage them in terms of what they can bring to the conversation. Because I think probably the relatively limited number of parish councils that joined us maybe tells us that they didn't quite grasp it. It was definitely more about what we could learn from them rather than what they could learn from us, and maybe we didn't quite sell that as well as we could. So we can do that, and certainly let's have that conversation again, I think.
Thank you, Steve.
Sorry, I was just going to jump in
Oh,
there as well.
sorry.
I think Sarah may want to speak about the Social Inclusion Partnership and the work that it does across the district. But just to reassure Councillor Bolton, while Steve said that there's some work to be done with the parishes themselves, this work hasn't been focused entirely on the city. We've made sure that the activities, for example, the Family Fun Days, we didn't just do in the city. We also did them in Wickham, which has a large population of economically deprived people as well. So, and the Summer Munchies program, we also had food available in Sparsholt. So again, just two examples of where we haven't focused entirely on the city. It has been across the district where areas of need have been identified.
Yes, I think just to add to that, that obviously Social Inclusion Partnership it works across the district. So certainly one of the issues that we'll be looking at is how to reach more vulnerable people in more rural areas, and that's already been acknowledged. So that could be something we can put into the work stream for the Social Inclusion Partnership. But also we've run some pop-up hubs over the summer in various rural areas with the Citizens Advice to see what the uptake was there, and what needs there were in those areas. And we're very conscious of the fact that we need to reach out to those rural areas and to do more there, to be able to offer services and bring services to people. We're looking to get a lift tracker, a low income tracker, which I believe some members have had demoed to them last year, which they found particularly interesting. And that's where you can actually identify not only kind of areas of deprivation, but areas where people are on low income, where they're not uptaking income that they could. So we could proactively identify people then who are missing out on benefits. So quite a range of things that we're trying to do.
Thank you for that, and thank you, Councillor Becker, for highlighting the Sparsholt Munchies project, because I remember at the time thinking it was a bit odd it was there, but I think you've now explained how it's kind of a custom thing to address a particular need in one of our more rural areas, where the needs are also fulfilled in different ways in the more populated areas. So thanks for that, very helpful. Councillor Warwick.
Thank you, Chairman. You've put a really good programme together in quite a short period of time as a sort of one-off. So if you were to repeat this again, what would be the sort of real highlights that you might do, or indeed you might continue anyway? And what would the the issues that perhaps didn't work quite as well that you probably wouldn't use again. It's more for interest. I don't know, 80-year-old yoga.
Certainly in terms of the second point, I think one of the things which we anticipated needing to kind of intervene or to do a significant bit of work on, and this actually came out from some of the early conversations with the parish councils in particular, was around transport. It was flagged up. Certainly, it was flagged up more as a sort of a likely area of concern. You know, people being able to. There's something about taking services to people, but you know, sometimes it's about people needing to get to those services where else they're located. Despite some quite considerable efforts to sort of reach out, to engage, to understand, to hear from people who might have a need. We spoke with Community First, for example, who operate a number of community transport services in the district. Nothing really ever presented itself by way of a really present requirement for help with transport. Now, I don't know whether that means that people just worked it out for themselves. During the COVID times, local communities were really good at just solving these things for themselves. And you know, as a council, we were there to support and help, but we didn't actually have to intervene as much as a lot of other districts did. So possibly that was part of the answer as well, is that I think communities have been more prepared, and that kind of support network exists far better than it did. So I think that's probably the area that stands out to me, is we expected to have to fund some transport activity, some transport service or provision, and that never really presented itself as a real demand. In terms of what's worked well, I think Melissa's already mentioned the family activities were really popular, really well taken up. So they certainly created a real buzz at the time. And I mean, the summit worked really well, and the way that's evolved into the social inclusion partnership and that active engagement, the dialogue that's brought about, the active conversation, the collaboration. I think again that's been a real bonus and a real strength that's come out of this, because it, as Councillor Becker mentioned, that goes far beyond cost of living and sort of looks at isolation and inclusion in a much broader sense. So that would probably stand out to me as the real positive.
Thank you, Steve. Do I have any questions from other? Councillor Greenberg.
Thank you very much. I mean, it's great to hear about the delivery of such a varied and supportive programme, and also the legacy of investment, which will transform services for the long term. I think that's really a great outcome as well. My question, I think, might have been slightly covered, but I just wanted to check. The Cost of Living Summit seemed like such a great and creative initiative, so I just wanted to check if you're planning to run that again. Thank you.
Not a problem. So as I said, the Social Inclusion Partnership has really been born out of the initial summit that was held, because lots of the organisations who attended that initial summit have seen the value of working together and continuing to work together. So they have committed to working in the Social Inclusion Partnership. So we haven't committed to running or concluding a further summit per se, but it is something, if the cost of living crisis does continue, it is something the Social Inclusion Partnership does continue to address, but could specifically address, you know, I think I'm speaking for Sarah here, but we could have a special meeting of the Social Inclusion Partnership to address cost of living issues if that proves necessary.
I'll just add to that, a lot of the attendees of the Cost of Living Summit have now come onto the Social Inclusion Partnership, which is absolutely brilliant. And we're always looking for more members. And we've divided into subgroups, which I think probably cover a lot of the issues around the cost of living. So we've got food resilience, financial inclusion, digital inclusion, health inequalities, and we're looking at repurposing one of the groups like a community support group. So we're trying to deal in a long-term, more sustainable way in partnership with a lot of those issues anyway. And we're having a face-to-face tip at Christmas as well. So there are a lot of the agencies that really came and put down all the issues that they had at the cost of living for the cost of living crisis and gave us all that information. We've kind of turned that into the Social Inclusion Partnership as a long-term kind of solution.
Councillor Morris.
Yeah, I'd like to firstly just echo all the comments of my fellow councillors on congratulating you and thanking you for your work. My question is regarding the fund pot for the various outside organisations, where we've been provided with some really good information on the number of people who've been beneficiaries, and it's been sort of broken down in the various sort of areas in the city and so forth. And my question is, if we have any other more feedback and from those different organisations on how effective they think their various programs have been, and in particular, if there's any demographic information on the sort of people they've been helping, just to ensure that there are no social groups that we've accidentally overlooked or left out. So requesting for more information there.
Yes, we will be providing additional information. At the moment, a lot of these grants are in progress, so we're waiting for an end of grant report. So we want to look at, we'll report back on the demographics. We put a basic infographic in the back of this pack, but we want to do something a little bit further, which demonstrates the reach in terms of the beneficiaries, the types of people that have been supported, the kind of things that have been supported as well, and how that's impacted on those residents. So we will be doing that going forward, but the information we don't have to hand at the moment, because a lot of them are halfway through or just embarking on their journey. So once that information is available, we will share that.
I've just got one question, and I think you've already touched on some of this already, which is just reiterate some of those, if you like, the improvements to the system that have come out of scaling up the process and better serving the people that are more vulnerable. What would you say are the kind of like 3 or 4 top improvements in how we address that that need within our communities that has been there in the past? It's just that the cost of living crisis has just amplified it big time. And are those improvements going to carry on through in terms of how we work with those people?
I would say certainly better joined up working. The social inclusion partnership has been a great way of bringing people together, avoiding duplication of work, avoiding multiple projects going on that we could pool resources and use more efficiently. So I think that's certainly one thing we take away is much better joined up working, more efficient working, and a better division of labour kind of across the district, with people kind of taking ownership of different areas.
And I suppose to add to that, I'll probably, at risk of repeating myself, I'd probably come back. I think the citizens' advice, the way that they've adapted and developed their services, I think that will make them much more agile and able to meet these needs going forward. And that they are so in touch with the need and the requirements of people. They've really been our source of intelligence. So again, that close working, we've always worked closely with them. But I think this last 12 months has really strengthened that, and the two-way conversation and dialogue with them. That's probably the big one, in addition to the part. And I think, just to echo Sarah's point, I think that whole thing around the collaboration, because that's where the real scaling up of this support and work can come from. As a council, we can do what we can do. We're a large organisation with a lot of influence and ability, but we're limited by our capacity. But the scale and breadth of the partners who are working with us through the partnership, I think, just creates such a huge capacity. So that's what really creates the potential to support people in the best going forward, I think.
And I'll just jump in there as well. As someone who's able to kind of see it from above, I think one of the other major improvements that has been the cross-council working, which is represented. We've got Sarah here from the housing team. We've got Steve and Melissa from the communities team, different directors, completely different teams in the council. But this area of work has meant that they are able to work together and ensure that there aren't duplication of work within the council as well as with organisations outside of the council. So the work can be really focused on improving services for residents.
Thank you for that. We've had questions. I know we've sort of led a little bit into debate, but I'll just open the floor up for anyone who wishes to make any comments in debate. Looking around the floor. Got Councillor Tippett Cooper.
Just to also add my thanks and congratulations to the officers for this scheme over the last year. It's important to emphasise, I think, that this is something which was given to officers to deliver in a short space of time on top of their current already very, very busy workloads. And if you look in through the paper, you can see things like £60,000 allocated for emergency grants, of which almost all was allocated. The amount of work that goes into each individual grant to make sure that's allocated to the right organisation, the checks are done, etc., and it's having an impact is really extensive. That's just one example of this entire paper. And then also not underestimating the work that actually needed to deliver all this. I'm not underestimating the actual impact this has. It empowers these community organisations to put these funds where it's most needed. An organisation like Street Reach, for example, is able to much better identify what young people need in a crisis than maybe many other organisations, including potentially the council, can actually identify. And it's really, really positive that although this was a one-off budget, that it has created really, really impactful and important legacy outcomes, such as the social partnership that you've described and talked about the benefits of really well tonight. And it's again really positive to know that the council is going to be obviously delivering its ongoing grants programme to continue to support these organisations. And I can't say thank you enough for all the hard work the officers have done. So thank you, Sarah, Steve and Melissa, and all your team, folks in your team as well. Please do pass it on.
Anybody else? Okay, I'll just, I'm not sure I can top John's citation there. It's always a bad idea to follow John. But I'd also like to acknowledge, as chair, the fantastic work that all of you have done, and obviously your teams, and in encouraging and building those relationships with partners that have ultimately delivered the support to those people most in need. And you know, that's really testimony to the effectiveness of kind of creating good relationships with partners. So thank you very much, and thank you. Oh, recommendation. Oh my gosh, what's my recommendation here? Oh my gosh, I know, this is the formality of, yes, I've got them here. So the recommendations are that the policy committee are asked to note the support provided to the residents by the council and its partners in response to the cabinet announcement to fund additional cost of living support measures in September 22. And the last line here has gone off my screen, off my page. If you could, yes.
The second recommendation is that you're asked to note the continued cost of living support available to households beyond September 23.
Apparently, formality is I have to ask that the committee is happy to note that. Thank you. I'm getting lots of nods. And thank you, Mrs. Adey, for setting me straight on that. It won't be the last time. Right, let's move on to the CNAP report. CNAP being Carbon Neutrality Action Plan, I believe, is the correct acronym. And today we're going to hear about and discuss the movement strategy and transport actions. And we have a presentation, I believe, led by Lucy McEwen, Transport Planner from Winchester City Council. And we also have Jeff Hobbs and Stuart Wilson of Hampshire County Council. So absolutely fabulous to have a joint team of Winchester City Council and Hampshire County Council on this subject. And I'm going to hand the floor over to, actually, am I going to hand the floor over? I'm going to hand the floor to Kelsey Learning, who is the portfolio holder for this area. And we will, I believe we got Councillor Wallace will want to say something after your session. Thank you, Kelsey.
Thank you, Chairman. I won't say too much because I don't want to spoil Lucy's thunder and the presentation, but the Winchester Movement Strategy is a joint city and council transport strategy which was agreed in 2019. It has the aims of reducing traffic, increasing levels of walking and cycling, and improving air quality while supporting economic growth. Since it was agreed, a lot has changed, particularly the declaration of both the city and county councils of the climate emergency. But given the timescales involved in transport projects, the benefits of the long-term partnership work and continuing the work streams of the strategy still remain very strong, and in the long run I think will give us significant benefits as a city. So with that, I'll hand over to Lucy to go over to tell you a bit about the strategy and also where we are with the work streams involved in it.
Thank you. Stuart will start first.
I'm just going to give a quick recap on the strategy, and Lucy and Jeff are going to go and give an update on the various plans and schemes that are being worked on. So yeah, the movement strategy was adopted by both councils in 2019, and it provides the kind of overall strategic direction for the schemes and plans that we work on in the city, and there's an agreed vision and 3 priorities. The movement strategy has a number of areas which provides the focus for the work that we do, and they're shown on the slide here. And if you go to the next slide, there are 10 movement strategy priorities for the next 10 years. And a number of those are underway and being developed, and some of them have already been implemented or will be implemented, and we'll give an update on some of those shortly. And if we go to the next slide, it was estimated as part of the technical work done for the movement strategy that if all those 10 proposed interventions are delivered, then they would achieve, at least 10% reduction in traffic, which is obviously essential. The city's road space is very limited. There's not much space to provide bus priority and walking and cycling improvements without reducing traffic, and traffic reduction and more people walking, cycling and using public transport also means we've got cleaner air, less noise from traffic, and increased physical activity and well-being.
Thank you, Stuart. So Jeff and I are going to run through some of the schemes that we have undertaken as part of the movement strategy, and also those that we are currently working on and working towards. As part of our Park and Ride expansion and bus priority work, last year we delivered the Barfield 2 Park and Ride multi-storey car park, and with the PV panels on the roof providing power to the 16 new EVCPs, and also have enough for battery storage. We expect the new Park and Ride Light to be opened at Kings Barton in the next couple of years, which will be served by a new local bus service that will operate via Kings Barton development. And looking ahead to the medium term, we are working with developers at Howard circa 850 space Park and Ride site that would serve the north of the city could be progressed. As part of our work looking at bus priority in the city centre, a southbound bus lane between Athelston Road and Worthy Lane Junction is being proposed. In addition, we're hoping that Winchester will be considered as a bid for the next round of electric bus funding with DfT, and we are also currently retendering our Park and Ride bus contract. In terms of parking and access, we have implemented changes to the parking charges in the city centre's central car parks in support of air quality objectives and trying to encourage people to park on the edge of the city. We've installed new cycle parking across the centre and reallocated parking bays for cycle parking, and we will continue to add
additional cycle parking as further locations are identified. It's worth noting at this point that that the management of on-street parking passes to Hampshire County Council from the 1st of October, but we are looking to continue an integrated approach with Hampshire for on and off-street parking. A number of active travel schemes as part of the City LC-WIP are currently being progressed by Hampshire, aimed at improving walking and cycling into and through the city. These schemes are currently scheduled for installation between autumn and spring next year and include a modal filter on High Church Lane, advanced stop lines at Drury Street, North Walls Hyde Street Junction, a cycle contraflow on Parchment Street, permitting cycling along the pedestrianised section of Middlebrook Street, an 18-month trial of a puffin crossing on Romsey Road near Clifton Terrace, and a contraflow cycle lane on High Street between Tower Street and Staple Gardens. And it's also worth noting that we have also closed the square to vehicular traffic in the evenings and at the weekends to make it a nicer place for pedestrians and eateries. The Worthy Road scheme looks to improve walking and cycling opportunities both along and across the corridor. The feasibility study undertaken over the past year proposes widening footways and cycleways, reducing the speed of 40 miles an hour to 30 in the section along Worthy Road, installing continuous footways and a number of zebra and parallel crossings. We will be undertaking preliminary and detailed design for the length of the corridor and are looking to deliver 2 new crossings in the Stoke Road area next spring. And over to Jeff now.
So in spring 2022, Winchester was one of 19 local authority areas that were shortlisted to receive funding to undertake a Mini Holland feasibility study. So a Mini Holland project it would replicate the 4 in London, outer London boroughs that look to deliver comprehensive packages of safe, continuous walking and cycling infrastructure. The 4 London boroughs had 8 years worth of funding and delivered quite a comprehensive package of routes on busy roads, area-wide traffic neighbourhood calming schemes and crossing improvements. So Hampshire and Winchester City Council work very closely with Cycle Winchester and the Walking Strategy Group on proposals for the city. The main elements were 4 cross-city connections, a network of quiet way routes set on quieter routes, a series of livable neighbourhoods linked by safe crossings, and the original pledge from the Department for Transport was that they would fund up to 2 or 3 of the strongest of the 19 proposals. Ultimately, the DFT have taken the decision to reallocate the funding intended for Mini Holland towards another large, high-profile transport project that was facing inflationary pressures. Nevertheless, the proposals offer a blueprint for how we can improve active travel across the city that can be taken forward as and when other funding opportunities arise. So Hampshire have been working closely with bus operators to look to improve the attractiveness of local bus services. Key to this is a new enhanced partnership plan and scheme, which sets out 10 ways which Hampshire will work together with our private commercial bus operators, including Stagecoach, to improve the quality and attractiveness and levels of use of local bus services. The £2 cap single fare, which is a government cost of living measure that began in January, has resulted in significant increases in passenger numbers, particularly on longer interurban bus corridors like the 64 and the 69. £2 cap fare will increase to £2.50 from the 1st of November 2023 and then remain at that level till the 31st of October 2024. Hampshire have also partnered with bus operators to launch a bus passenger charter, setting out obligations and expectations for bus users from bus operators and from us. And we've launched a Try the Bus campaign to raise awareness both of the £2 cap fare and of concessionary travel passes for the over 66s. We're also developing a series of route investment plans for our most well-used bus corridors that will set out a series of interventions for ways we will improve bus stops and shelters and speed up buses
and help make services more punctual and reliable. In July, the DfT announced an award to Hampshire of 3.6 million of revenue funding to enable Hampshire to continue to support bus services that are socially necessary, which have experienced reduced passenger numbers since the pandemic and higher costs due to inflationary pressures. On electric buses, the first electric bus in the Fareham Gosport area is being delivered next month for driver familiarisation. They'll be joined by 61 other buses between now and next Easter. Earlier this month, the DfT announced a second round of zero emission bus funding, and unfortunately, any Hampshire County Council bid would be prioritised fairly low down the DfT's priority list, given that we have been successful in previous rounds of funding. Nevertheless, we're in discussions with bus operators to understand their appetite for being part of the bid, and Winchester is one of those places that are being considered as part of that process. So Hampshire and the City Council have been working with Solent Transport on a potential location for a trial micro consolidation of freight deliveries location. So this would provide first and last mile deliveries from the motorway area into the city centre and potentially reduce the number of van and lorry movements into the city centre. So this has been trialled successfully in other places, including Bristol and Berlin. And we are working with Solent Transport to see if a trial can be of interest to third-party logistics firms and whether it can be delivered as a trial scheme that could be proving the concept for a more permanent solution. In terms of funding, funding is an ever-moving picture, and there are a range of different sources of funding open to us. Most national funding is awarded these days via a competitive bidding process, which can be quite resource intensive and quite difficult to succeed at. There's usually more bidders than there is money available. The zero emission buses is one example of that. So in terms of how we deliver our priority schemes for Winchester through the movement strategy, it's looking like we will need to rely more on local funding resources, including SIL, Section 106 contributions and local transport plan funding, as well as fleet investment by bus operators. A county deal is less likely in the short term due to differences of views between us and unitary authority colleagues.
We just wanted to put this slide in to just make sure that everybody realised that the movement strategy team aren't working in a silo, and that we are working alongside the Central Winchester Regeneration team, the Station Approach team, and Sir John Moore Barracks, working on solutions for bus provision, ensuring active travel is at the forefront of everything, looking at park and ride, and considering the impact of car park closures.
Yeah, just a final slide really to say that the County Council has published its local transport plan 4, and that obviously provides the policy framework for travel and transport across the County Council. In the slide, just showing you the two kind of guiding principles that are set out in the local transport plan. So it's much more focused on planning for people and places and not for cars, and also sets out how we'll contribute to the national government's plan to decarbonise transport, which is set out in the DfT's transport decarbonisation plan.
In terms of, whilst we've consulted on it and published a draft LTP4, we are awaiting national guidance from the Department of Transport that would deal with issues around carbon calculation. And once more clarity is known about that, then a decision will be taken as to when the best time would be to adopt the LTP4 formally as a policy document of HCC.
Thank you.
Thank you, Lucy, Jeff and Stuart. Before we go into questions from members, I'm going to ask Councillor Wallace to have his moment in the sun. Thank you, Councillor Wallace.
Thank you, Chair. 4 years into the 10-year Winchester Movement Strategy Plan, progress has been extremely poor. And whilst the officers have done a good job of highlighting the small steps that have been made, our residents deserve better than any pretense that the plan is on track. Points that we didn't cover in any detail were delays to the LTP4. The LTP4 proposes transformational changes. It sounds great, and the adoption of this plan is key to making significant changes to transport infrastructure in the city. However, consultation on the plan closed 15 months ago, and yet the plan has still not been adopted, and it's not clear when this will happen. Delays to the city's local cycling and walking infrastructure plan. Consultation on this plan closed in February last year, February 2022, and yet the plan has still not been adopted. Delays to the Winchester District cycling and walking infrastructure plan, which continues to trail far behind the city plan. Spending on new cycle parking is behind plan, with 40,000 allocated last year and only 13,000 spent. Meanwhile, infrastructure projects continue to be approved that will increase traffic in the city centre. The Mini Holland project has been cancelled by the government, so hopes of funding for this initiative have disappeared. And bus services in our district continue to be reduced or even cut completely. Whilst many of these issues are outside of Winchester Council's direct control, this council shouldn't be part of perpetuating the myth that there is an effective plan being worked. It's time to be honest, step back and re-evaluate where we go from here. The priorities of the movement strategy were to reduce city centre traffic, support healthier lifestyle choices, invest in infrastructure to support sustainable growth. In order to align with the Council's net zero commitments, to these priorities should be added the priority to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, as transport is the largest contributor to greenhouse gas emissions in the Winchester district. Next, the emissions savings from each of the schemes need to be quantified to help with prioritising the key actions. Then we need to be bolder in our aims. To quote the Winchester Movement Strategy, overall, the evidence provided a strong mandate to be bold. Don't just tinker around the edges, but seize the opportunity for real change. Currently, the next steps in this report appear to be limited to tinkering around the edges and are unlikely to have any effect on the amount of traffic in Winchester. In order to deliver any significant reductions in traffic, it's time for the council to be bolder, to step up on behalf of our residents, to drive real improvements to Winchester's cycling, walking, roads and public transport infrastructure that will improve the lifestyle for our residents and start to deliver the changes that are needed to reduce our carbon impact. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Wallace. I'm going to ask Councillor Lerner if she'd like to respond to your thoughts at this point.
Thank you, Chairman. I absolutely agree with Councillor Wallace's sentiments, but I think we do have to recognise that transport schemes are astonishingly expensive. We're operating in an environment where the government is making a total mess of what transport funding is available. The competitive process is requiring councils to put a lot of resource into putting bids together for what money is available at a time when local government and particularly upper tier authorities, and clearly it's not my job to defend the county, but they are struggling and not on the edge of bankruptcy. I think we have to recognise that we have to work within the resources we have and do the best with what we have. But, you know, it would be great to be able to be putting ambitious schemes together, but that would take even more resource than we're already putting into this. And as we know, we as a council are going to have to look quite hard at levels of resource that are available going forward too. So absolutely agree with the sentiment, but I think there is a practicality problem here. The other thing is that, I mean, we recognise that the movement strategy is out of date in many ways, and if we were rewriting, you know, the kind of vision, the aims today, then we would probably write something very different. But at the end of the day, I think that we do have a set of work streams which are broadly the right ones in terms of acting for Winchester itself. I think we have much bigger issues going out into the district and how we finance some of the work that we'd love to be able to do out there too. So it is an ongoing process. It is a case of trying to grab what government funding is available. And actually just having the movement strategy has helped us access streams of funding that wouldn't be available. I mean, some of it, for example, the Mini Holland work, okay, maybe they took away the funding after we'd done the feasibility, but at least they paid for the feasibility, which now means that we have a whole set of schemes and work that has been done. The ambitious part would be if we can get the money to do the whole lot, and that's when we can really motor on, or not motor on, pedal on.
Yeah, not too bad if it's e-powered bikes, but anyway, I get your point. Thank you. I guess now we need to open up the floor to members for questions, and then we'll move on to debate after questions. Just to remind you, questions first, we go around the table, and then we'll have a bit of debate. I have Councillor Warwick. I think I saw a nod from Councillor Greenberg, Councillor Morris, and Councillor Tippett Cooper. We've got 4 in line. So Councillor Warwick, over to you.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for the presentation. I don't know who I'm directing this question to, but one of the biggest issues, and I appreciate the movement strategy is really about the city centre of Winchester. One of the most difficult things, and I guess Hannah will probably agree with me on this, is sort of if you're from a slightly outlying area of the district, it's really hard to kind of get to Winchester safely on a bike. You know, certainly that's one of the trickiest things. That's a much larger LC whip with a much bigger cost associated with it. But are there plans to sort of improve the access to Winchester city centre for those who wish to travel by bike? So, for example, my ward, Badger Farm, Oliver's Battery, that's quite a tricky, interesting journey, certainly in the rain. Twyford, Colton Common, similar issue, not that far, so it's very doable, but it's quite a tricky journey.
Yes, so if I can give you a quick update on the city and the district LC whips. As Councillor Wallace said, the draft city LC whip went to public consultation last year, and that looked at primary walking and cycling routes. We did get a lot of feedback on that, and a review was undertaken of that LC whip. Hampshire Traded Services team have picked that up now, and have just started to look at an initial data collection, and are reviewing the primary routes, especially because the original LC whip was written before the guidance, the LTN 120, had been published. So we just need to go back and check on those. And they're also looking at secondary routes, which is where sort of Oliver's Battery and Badger Farm will come in. And they will also, in line with the rest of their LC whips, look at walking zones. For the district LC whip, we started that last autumn with a stakeholder workshop. And we looked at issues, barriers and opportunities in that. Sustrans in Hampshire then went away and did an information gathering exercise. And from the data sets they got from that and the feedback they got from the workshop, went and did a high number of audits of routes across the district. They came back with a draft network, which we presented to stakeholders in the summer. Following on from the feedback we got from that engagement and internal discussions that have happened at Hampshire, there will be a review of the classification of some of those draft network routes and a review of the routes, just to ensure that the district LC whip takes on the fact that we're looking at semi-rural areas. So therefore, it wouldn't follow along the same lines perhaps as the urban LCWIPs that Hampshire have written and that the draft had started to follow along. They're doing exactly the same for the Test Valley LCWIP and the East Hants LCWIP. So there will be a bit of a delay on the district one, but we want to make sure that we get this district LCWIP done correctly at this early stage, and that it reflects the needs of the district and the needs of the people who are living in the district.
If I can add to that, Chairman, the LCWIPs are very important to us, particularly because we have committed to using some of our SIL towards those schemes. And one of the things is we had a conversation yesterday about how nature crosses borders. Well, the same goes for walking and cycling, and it's really important that our district LCWIP recognises that a lot of people actually go cross-border, particularly in areas like down in Waterlooville, where most of the services that people access are actually in a neighbouring authority. So it is not only making sure that we get the routes right within our district, but also the ones that go outside it.
Can I also make a comment? Councillor Wallace said about spending from cycle parking. We may have only spent 13,000 out of the 40, but I will check on that number. But we have spent £70,000 of Hampshire's money on cycle parking. So we haven't just spent 13, we've also spent 70 on top of that.
Okay, thanks for that clarification. I was actually thinking that is that a good thing in that we've not spent as much as we thought we had, or is it an indication that there's projects that haven't been completed?
It means we've got more money to spend across the district.
Exactly. So just checking where we are on the questions. Sorry, check with. Yeah, so it's Councillor Greenberg.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm really excited about the delivery of the district LCWIP. I'm hoping that Colden Common and Twyford will be a primary route into Winchester. And I think when we can get that delivered, that will really take some of the city centre pressure off the traffic, because that means that there are alternative ways to get in for people. I would like to start by sort of praising Winchester City Council's commitment to a 2030 net zero target, and particularly when elsewhere in Westminster there's some backtracking on green policies, to put it mildly. It was really heartening last night to have Winchester City Council redouble its commitment to climate, and that is great. And earlier this week we had a CNAP presentation, the Carbon Neutrality Action Plan presentation, and in that, one of the statistics that was put to us in that is that transport in our district is responsible for more than 50% of the carbon. So 2030 is soon upon us, and there's a sense of urgency here. And I suppose my question is, what reassurance do we have from data that the measures which are within the Winchester Movement Strategy are actually going to be enough to keep us on track and deliver the necessary reductions in carbon that we need, as well as traffic? So there's an estimate of a 10% reduction in traffic. My sense is that maybe we need a bit more, but maybe I'm wrong about that. So I wondered if we've got any data to support that. And then I suppose also, how confident are we that we are actually going to be able to get the funding to deliver some of this? You've mentioned how difficult it is to get that. And in this climate at the moment, I despair of how we're going to get any of this done. And there is an urgency, a real urgency. And we need to think about how we're going to lobby for that, because otherwise I don't see how we will get these things done. And then my third question is sort of similar, but are we on track to meeting? So I've kind of ignored LT4 because we're not adopting at the moment, but are we on track to meeting the Department for Transport decarbonisation targets of 50% of journeys to be walked or cycled within the city by 2030, and also the world-class cycling network by 2040? Fingers crossed for that one. Thank you so much.
If I could just jump in with a kind of qualifying question in relation to that. There's several really good questions there. I'd love to know the answers myself. I just wanted to get clear, or maybe you can make us all clear on the scope of the Winchester movement strategy relative to the transport elements of the overall CNAP thing. So I think Councillor Greenberg referred to transport as a whole is what the biggest contributor to carbon. And I think it's divided into 3 bits: motorway, A roads and minor roads, something like that. And it's quite substantial. I'm just wondering to what extent in scope the Winchester movement strategy addresses that. I make a guess that it more focuses on the minor roads within the scope of Winchester City. And fortunately, my ward, the Worthies, happens to creep into that definition of scope, but it doesn't really go much beyond Badger Farm and Oliver's Battery. Could you just clarify the scope there, and as part of your answer to Councillor Greenberg? Thank you.
Okay, so when the movement strategy was produced, carbon calculating was still quite a new thing, and the new LTP4 guidance will contain an LTP4 carbon tool that will be useful for local transport authorities to quantify the likely carbon reduction of different transport interventions. So we're not there yet, and we probably need to, well, we do need to revisit the movement strategy in light of that new carbon reduction tool and the climate emergency, because it was put together just before the climate emergency declarations. So there is a gap and a need there to reconsider that. So the movement strategy, will it deliver the carbon reductions we need? If we can get funding, and if we can couple the carrots and the sticks in the right way, in the right phasing, with providing people with attractive alternatives at the same time as using demand management techniques to persuade people to be less reliant on the car, then we do have a chance of achieving the carbon reductions that we've set out. It is difficult to get funding to deliver schemes, so we have to really focus on value for money, what's going to make the biggest difference, and potentially some schemes that other cities have delivered that focus on access restrictions or bus only entrances to on particular routes can, if you can persuade people that they are inherently a good thing and get the comms right, could be potentially beneficial and could be delivered in Winchester. So schemes like bus gates can be delivered relatively cheaply with a traffic regulation order, and they can be done as a trial. So we probably, well, the DfT's decarbonisation targets of reducing, well, of getting 50% of journeys by walking and cycling do seem quite hard to achieve at this point in time based on where we are now, particularly for Winchester, and the fact we put together a really strong Mini Holland package of interventions, and then the funding that we had hoped would materialise no longer exists. So if we can find other ways of funding those measures set out in the feasibility study, then that is still achievable. But currently, the amount of funding and sources of funding, there's a gap there, a delivery gap, and a world-class cycle network. I think if we were to find funding and deliver the Mini Holland package in full, then we could say Winchester would be well on the way to having a world-class cycle network for the city, despite all its lovely topography and hills. And that would then connect with the villages like Twyford and Colden Common through tentacles that stretch out beyond the city. So, and Councillor Camosen, your question about the scope, and I think local roads are a smaller proportion than the other two categories of road. So A roads would not this, so it's motorways and trunk roads, which includes A34 and other A roads, and then most of the main A roads that are left are in that second category. Then most B and C roads and unclassified roads are in that local roads category. So if we had a quiet way network that would use those unclassified residential quiet roads to get people from villages and suburbs, avoiding those busier A roads, and offer an attractive alternative to cycling along a busy road.
Thank you. I think what I was just trying to clarify there is the Winchester Movement Strategy is not the whole thing for addressing the whole of the transport thing. We just need to keep focused on that. You know, it does its role in certain places, but there needs to be some other bigger stuff as well. I got that right then.
If I may add to that, Chairman, I mean, the movement strategy was not written as a strategy designed to reduce carbon. That is almost a side effect of it. What this is really about is about having those more livable neighbourhoods, you know, where it's easy and attractive to walk and cycle. And it's also about improving air quality and giving people a healthier environment to live in. And while the low carbon agenda in transport is relying quite heavily on moving towards electrification and other zero carbon fuels, that will not improve air quality. We do need to drive for that reduction in traffic, as well as just thinking about this as a, you know, climate change measure.
We'll move on to the next question, which I think was from Johnny. Sorry, Councillor Morris. I apologise.
Thank you. Just to begin with, seeing the 10 WMS priorities, I was delighted to see that the new Park and Ride site on Andover Road is priority number 1. I don't know if that reflects that it being the top priority, or it just happens to be the first on the list. And regarding that expansion, there are various aspects to it. There's the Park and Ride side of Andover Road, which I think is scheduled here for the next 2 to 3 years, but that depends on, as I understand it, that depends on Carla Homes, how quickly they get their houses built and so on. The local bus service is dependent on the completion and adoption of the road through Kings Barton, but it's not currently viable if that road has a gap in the middle where the buses can't get through and you have to turn around. And that it's not beyond the bounds of possibility that there might be a Park and Ride in the John Moore Barracks site before the one in Kings Barton. And so my question with that aspect is just whether these things are dependent on each other, that this has to happen before that happens, or whether they are independent projects. And my second question is regarding the southbound bus lane on Andover Road from Atherstone Road to Worthy Lane, which sounds great. Would I be correct in characterising that as a bus and cycle lane, or just a bus lane? And when the buses are going back north again, what is the idea that they use the normal lane going north, or is they'll be diverted to go Stockbridge Road or something in a circular route?
Thank you. Who's going to try and tackle those tricky subjects?
Okay, so in terms of those 10 priorities for the next 10 years, they're all equal in terms of weighting. There's no prioritization or ranking. Don't read anything into those numbers. So the discussions with Carla suggest you're right. We would need the Spine Road complete first before we can run a local bus service. That is something that's very important to us, and the Park and Ride Light site is a developer commitment. It's the planning approval for Kings Barton. So your question around are they linked or independent? They have the potential to be independent of one another in that an 850 space park and ride site further out would be best served by an express bus service straight into the city centre, like the one from South or St Catherine's. So potentially, once a larger site does open, then there could be some demand that abstracts from the Park and Ride Light site at Kings Barton. We'll have to look at that and see when we cross that bridge, when we come to it. The southbound bus lane on Andover Road, we have been in discussions with the Station Approach project team about Cattle Market Car Park, and we believe it would be preferable to separate cyclists from buses. So the current proposal would be to set back the building line of any new buildings within the Cattle Market Car Park further in, so that a strip of the car park would become a walking and cycling route, which would mean that the southbound bus lane, which would be where the on-street parking is at the moment, would be for buses only. Then in terms of heading north, the park and ride buses would use the same lane as general traffic heading north. There wouldn't be a detour. And we're considering options for how people who are cycling would want to go north, whether they would want to do it on a shared use path on the car park side, or whether they would want an on-road uphill lane. So that we're looking at both options.
Thank you. I think next up is Councillor Tippett Cooper.
I've reduced my questions as I've gone through this from about 15 to about 2 or 3. So I'm grateful so far for the contributions. It does feel like the Winchester movement strategy that Winchester City Council or Hampshire County Council are trying to walk forward, but the government are putting them in cement boots, or trying to cycle forward and the government are puncturing their tyres, because frankly it seems like there's big problems in terms of actually getting funding to do things that would really make a concrete difference. I suppose going back to what Councillor Wallace said, it does feel like I accept what Councillor Learning was saying about the movement strategy is about much more than reducing emissions, but it feels like it would be useful to at least understand how each of these schemes does have a emissions impact, and whether that can be factored into the next sort of update or not, I don't know, but that would be an interesting thing to have included if that's entirely possible. And I think what it does, it helps us then identify and prioritise schemes and look potentially at going beyond relying on national funding and seeing what potential funding we can source elsewhere and ourselves. I appreciate that's really difficult, and again we're completely handicapped by national funding, which is really needed for these schemes. And actually to add as well, this is not, there's been a lot of kind of concerned comments tonight, but I know there's a lot of work from the officers on these schemes, and in particular things like the Worthy Lane scheme. I know Jeff's done really great work on that. It's extraordinarily popular. There's been really good engagement with the community. Really hope that goes forward. And things like Stoke Road crossing will have a huge impact on people's lives day to day, because they can feel like they can get to school safely with their kids, as something as fundamental as that. So the question 1 is this around whether we can potentially include emissions in the next update. Question 2 is whether we are able to I suppose reevaluate things and see what schemes we can actually deliver ourselves without relying on this current government, who are proving to be utterly hopeless when it comes to tackling the climate emergency.
She's going to be bold enough to put your head above the parapet.
I can try, and Lucy
Leave
can.
the carbon down.
So your Councillor Tippett Cooper, you said, could it potentially be factored into the next update? So, so clearly, potentially it could, but there would be a potential resource implication for us in doing so. So that's not a no. That's if it would be helpful and useful and result in better prioritization, then it is something we could consider. So if there's a strong political appetite, it can be discussed at the next movement strategy board, and we can take it from there.
Yeah, I can see Jeff looking at me at this point for my response. I think this is quite difficult because actually what we're looking for is system change here rather than individual projects, which, you know, are very tightly defined in their benefits. So, for example, the Stoke Road crossing was mentioned, and as you say, it's very popular in your ward. However, that crossing will be fantastic for mine too, because that will make people feel much happier about cycling over King's Barton and crossing the Worthy Road there and going on into town. So there are system benefits to some of these schemes, and I think there is a question about how beneficial it really would be to put all the extra effort into you know, working out the exact impact as opposed to actually taking a common sense look about which will have most impact to the most people.
Thank you, Councillor Loney. Councillor Bolton.
Sorry, there we go. Now I've got an echo. But it was actually, my question was to come back to the parking strategy, and also something you mentioned briefly last night at the full council. Because I noticed in the report you mentioned about parking charges on central car parks to support air quality objectives. And myself, Councillor Wallace, Mr. Gagg, we sit on the air quality committee. And although the data is limited and not perfect, there is a sense in the data there that this is on the air quality and the effect of reductions in transportation, etc., that there's an element of diminishing returns now in terms of the effect. And I'm particularly interested in the recent move to sort of bring in the charges overnight for certain parking in the centre. And you mentioned that we're monitoring what's going on there. And I'm keen that, you know, we also talked last night about pragmatic approaches, sensible approaches, realistic, that if you could maybe explain how you're monitoring that, not just in terms of the effect that has on the outcome you desire.
Councillor Bolton, if you don't mind.
Do you want me to rush on? Do you want me to speed up?
No. I'm just wondering if you're coming to a question that is relevant to the material today as opposed to the material last night.
Well,
council.
I thought of that
because it is contained within the movement strategy, as agreed between the city and county, that parking charges would be used on that demand side of things. So it is part of the movement strategy. So it is a relevant question, Councillor Bolton.
Thank you. So do you mind if I? Yeah.
Perfectly fine. Thank you.
And I will try and speed up. So essentially, I'm interested to know how the outcomes are being monitored in terms of the desired effect, be it air quality, be it whatever you're seeking to measure there, and also what concerning effect it might have on, say, nighttime economy, that type of thing. And if you're monitoring that, are you prepared to make changes to try and adapt the policy if you see it having a detrimental effect and not actually achieving those positive outcomes that you? So forgive me for rambling a little bit there, but I think we got to the point, hopefully.
Yeah, yes, I think I know what you're getting at. In terms of the monitoring, the BID have recently introduced a new footfall system which gives much more granular data, which uses mobile phone tracking rather than clicking people as they walk past to monitor on the streets, which not only gives, yes, so the BID are following your phone, I'm afraid, Councillor Bolton, which not only gives us data about where people are, but when they are, how long they spend in town and so on. So we're getting much better figures, for example, around dwell time, how long are people spending in the town? And obviously that's something that we want to encourage because, the longer they spend, the more likely they are to spend money with our local businesses. So we have been looking at that, and we do actually have the average hourly data for when people are in town. As I said, it's really early days, and given the vagaries of weather, the national economy, you don't want to really extrapolate too far from 1 month's data. But those actually are very positive in terms of footfall in that kind of mid-evening, 8 o'clock, that period where you expect people to be going for food and the pub. So we are looking at that. But I think we also do have to remember that this is around system change, and it will take time for people to adjust their behaviour. One of the things we know is that we don't have evening buses because it's too cheap and easy for people to drive into the centre of town. And until we need to do, it is that carrot and stick, approach. So certainly talking to the bus companies, that is looking at that, how much it costs you to drive as opposed to how much it costs you to take the bus is quite important.
Thank you, Councillor Loney. I am now worried at how much the BID know about how much time I spend in certain coffee shops.
This is data which is entirely anonymised, so they certainly don't have any idea about who, but they do have a lot more data than they had a year ago.
Right. I'm now slightly more relieved. If I can ask a question, it's about buses, because I think one part of the strategy is about creating the conditions where there is less use of the car, not stopping the use of the car, but less use of the car, and that where people can, they walk, they cycle, but also that people use buses. I have been hearing in my ward, but I hear it more widely as well, but especially in my ward, that I would describe the bus service as fragile. By that I mean at peak times of day in the morning, you might just suddenly find the bus you went for at sort of 8:30 or whatever the time is, just doesn't come, it's cancelled. Now, that time of day, it's a sort of quarter of an hour, well, maybe half an hour service. So that's enough that it can make you late to college, late to school, late to work, and all the rest of it. So you've got that level of fragility. It was brought home. Well, I've been hearing about it for a long time, with lots of rumours around on the forums. Yesterday evening, while those of us as members were in council, I was seeing on my family group chat, daughter has been to the gym, leisure centre. She's walked back to the centre for a 7:30 bus, and turns out, after waiting for a little bit, turns out bus has been cancelled. Next bus is an hour's time. So she does things to kind of, occupy herself, decides that Mackie D's, the people in there are just a bit too hostile, so she goes back outside to the bus stop, and waits till 8:30 because we only have an hourly service in the evening. We do have a bus service, which I'm sure Councillor Bolton would say, fantastic, once an hour would be brilliant. But we have a bus service, it's once an hour, so 8:30 hasn't turned up. Eventually comes at 9 o'clock. So she has lost 90 minutes. She passed her driving test literally 2 weeks ago. And this episode has convinced her she needs to get her own car so she's not dependent on access to my wife's car because my wife was out last night. And it's a bit of a long story. And our personal story is probably just replicated across the district. And what we do need to have are robust, resilient bus services. More frequent is good, but it needs to be resilient. It needs to be run on a timetable and it needs to be more or less on time, notwithstanding when the M3 and the A34 get closed and nothing runs on time. But we need to have resilience in that system. And I don't see that happening. If I'm honest, I don't see within the Winchester Movement Strategy something which is going to address that. And I don't know what the solution is, but I don't see the private sector stepping up to that. I don't see how making it resilient is almost certainly going to be in conflict with being profitable. So I don't know how we achieve that. I'm not an advocate for bringing it all back into the public sector, but I think the public arena needs to figure out what levers does it have. And I've gone away from a question here to a rant. But
Chairman, I think your question is around what can we do to make Stagecoach do a better job?
Thank you for picking out the question from my rant. Over to you, Lucy, Jeff, Stuart, whoever wants to pick that one up.
Thank you, Chair. So obviously the 1985 Local Transport Act basically created two categories of bus service. It created commercial services that were fully covered from the fare box and were commercial. So bus operators then set the fares, the timetable, everything like that. Then there's the areas that fall between the cracks that are supported services where Hampshire County Council and district partners help provide the socially necessary safety net to help people access jobs and opportunities and that sort of thing. So yeah, obviously outside the leisure centre, that isn't a particularly well used bus route other than a park and ride contract that is under contract to the City Council. So obviously there are routes like.
I could just clarify, she walked back into the city centre to catch the spring.
The spring, right?
So
Sorry.
it was
Okay.
in the city centre,
Yeah.
not at leisure centre.
Yeah. So thank you for that clarification, Chair. So obviously, thinking back a while ago, sort of before there were more austere times, the County Council and the City Council did support evening and early morning bus services and Sunday services. Funding pressures meant that was no longer doable. So that meant that the supported services on the margins, early morning, late evening, had to be reduced, which means that what we're left with is what is substantively a commercial service within Winchester city area. And yeah, that if there were still contracts, then if services were still operated under contract, then we would have redress and we could hold them to account for those services. So we do have a new bus passenger charter. We do have an enhanced partnership where Councillor Adams King and represents the County Council. He can hold those bus operator MDs like Stagecoach to account for failings. So the enhanced partnership plan is all about making sure Hampshire delivers what it says it will deliver and bus operators deliver what they say they will deliver. And through that spirit of partnership, it should help to overcome some of those tensions that Local Transport Act 1985 created of creating commercial and non-commercial. So what we want is all about customers and meeting their needs and making sure if a timetable is advertised, that timetable gets delivered. So I'm really sorry about your daughter's experience. That isn't acceptable, and I can talk to Stagecoach about that if you would like me to.
Just to be clear, I'm not too worried about that one experience. It's just that's replicated across the district. And I'm thinking, I realise that when you live way out, we have got bus services. You don't have that problem out there. You have to get in a car. But thinking about the Winchester Movement Strategy and the scope, we need to make sure the bus services within that are resilient. And I just to be clear, I'm not having a go at you guys. You're working within the constraints that you're working within. But I just would observe that within the Winchester Movement Strategy, maybe we need to identify the things that will lead to a more resilient bus service. Because if we don't have a resilient bus service, we ain't going to get a shift of people to the bus. Councillor Learning wants to wrap my knuckles probably.
Thank you. Not wrap your knuckles as much as say that obviously there are questions that the movement strategy isn't capable of addressing because we don't have the right levers within that. But I think that spirit of partnership working is important. Stagecoach have had a lot of issues with drivers. They have been, as anybody who's seen the number of driver training buses going around Winchester will know, they have actually been training a lot of drivers up. Not quite as many as we might think, because Winchester's one of their training centres, so a lot of them are actually then going to other parts of Hampshire. But they're saying that they are, getting closer to having the correct complement of drivers, which will help with the resilience of the service. But one of the things is that congestion is an absolute killer for them as far as the bus timetables are concerned. So in a sense, the way that the Winchester Movement Strategy helps with this is simply by trying to reduce that traffic on the roads, reduce that congestion, and take measures, even if they're relatively small, like the bus lane down the Andover Road, which just give them that extra few minutes to get through the traffic. It's also important to recognise that the more buses there are, the easier it is for them to run an effective service, because you might be one driver down, but if you've got 6 working, then it's much in the evening, then it's much easier for them to make sure that they only cancel 1 bus and not 2. So I think it will contribute towards a better bus service, but not as directly as we might like.
Thank you, Councillor Learning. Jeff, you want to jump back in?
So thank you, Chair. So in terms of how Hampshire are looking to support bus operators with driver recruitment and other shortages, we have been working as the Hampshire County Council Employment and Skills team have been working with Stagecoach and other bus operators to have those conversations with them about support for those not in education, employment or training, and apprenticeships to sort of help raise the profile of bus driving as a career to help address those staff shortages. Obviously, a big factor behind a lot of those driver recruitment issues were a lot of people took early retirement. Some went to be lorry drivers because lorry drivers earned more. So yeah, have increased remuneration and things are on a positive trajectory with those driver issues. There's also been supply chain issues with mechanical parts for buses, which have affected the number of buses that they've been able to put out on the road. But Stagecoach, in our regular monthly meetings, have been saying that things are improving.
Okay, thank you. Now, formally, we should move to debate. I want to just put it out there for anyone who wants to make any comments. We've got Councillor Greenberg. Yeah, okay, so Councillor Greenberg.
Thank you. I suppose the little thing to start with is first of all, I'm a little bit concerned that all of these measures, when added up together, are predicted to reduce city centre traffic by 10%. And I hope that that will give us the reduction we need in the improvement that we need in air quality. I know it says or more, so I'm kind of gunning for the or more on that one. I'm also I'm glad that you giggled at what I said, but it's kind of depressing that everybody giggled when I said a world-class cycle network by 2040. I certainly want to be cycling in with Councillor Warwick to one of our meetings soon. And when we think about a world-class cycling network and we think about the Netherlands have been investing £25 per capita per year for decades, and that's why they have the cycling network that they have. In this country, we only invest £1 to £2 per capita per year, and that's why we've got such a massive sort of cavern between what our aspirations are and what we're going to be able to achieve. And I think, given the sticking points in the funding that we're having at the moment, I wonder if the county could help us by thinking a little bit more out the box about system change and about change management. And I wonder whether, when we went to the LC Whip workshop recently, there's a lot of focus on highly engineered solutions, which I understand are exciting, but it's clear to me that just speed limit reduction would make so much more deliverable at a much more affordable rate. We would just get a lot more bang for our buck. So if we could get 20 miles an hour where people and traffic mix, that would make the cycling or walking much easier within city centres. And if we could consider lowering the faster speeds on rural roads, that will also allow our district LC Whip to be delivered hopefully by 2040. That would be really great. And I think that we're at a point now where we need to be thinking about stuff like that. I also wanted to make a comment about the micro consolidation. I know that you're considering various different places for that, and I would like to urge you to consider a site that is near rail, because we need to future-proof transport and freight, and I would hope that we'll be moving a lot of our freight off the road, off HGVs and onto electrified rail. In fact, that is kind of aligned with the aspirations of Southampton Docks to increase their rail freight by about a third. So that's obviously going to help us with our climate targets as well, if we can do that rather than just promoting HGV use. I think that's all I've got to say at the moment. Thank you very much.
Any further comments or debate? Okay. Thank you, everyone, for that. I'm just going to comment. You might have sensed a tone of kind of disappointment in progress, and it's not. I really want to say, I think the fact that we have a Winchester movement strategy that is jointly agreed between the county council and the city council is fantastic. Getting two organisations, particularly given the political leadership is different, can be a bit tricky to achieve. So I think that's really good, and I commend you guys in particular for, leading the charge, trying to get things done. I think what you're maybe sensing here is a bit of frustration that we don't move quick. We're not able to go because you don't have the funding to go from having worked out something to actually delivering it. And the Worthy Lane cycle project is a really good case in point where you've done some fantastic work to map that out. I know there's a bit more needed to be done, but then the rules of how the funding are applied for get changed, and that means you've gone through the process of engaging with Cycle Winchester, with the public, and having worked it all out. And it feels like you've gone from almost there to a few steps back. And I can appreciate it must be demoralizing for those of you involved in it. But I hope you keep focused on it and keep pushing for it, because you'll get support from the other councillors here. But I think the frustrations are lots of fantastic, there's good ideas, we just want to get from idea to implementation. And it feels like funding is a key point there. It'd be great if we could put pressure on central government to change how it does the funding things on some of these projects. I do wonder if we can, maybe we need to take some actions back internally and think, okay, how can we be a bit more creative, as I think Councillor Tippett Cooper suggested earlier, to, if not fund things completely, prime the pump a bit more, just to show that things can be delivered. But I'd like to thank you for coming along tonight and handling some tricky questions, possibly outside of the scope of what you were hoping for. Thank you. We don't have recommendations to do it. Thank you. Okay, it's 8:25. I apologise to those of you at the back who are waiting to join us at the table, and apologies to keeping everyone here tonight. The item number 8 is a paper on social value delivered through Winchester's Leisure Centre, and we've got, I believe, Steve Lincoln, I know for sure. Laura Jones, who I'm not sure, oh, you must be, and I'm sorry, I've forgotten, you're from EA, Alison, thank you. And I'm expecting that Councillor Becker would like to do the introductions or hand off to Steve.
Well, you stole my thunder, Steve. I was going to introduce, so I've got Laura Jones here. As Laura's been here almost exactly a year now as the contract manager for the council's contract with Everyone Active. Alison is, I'm not sure of your official title, Alison. Alison is our main point of contact at EA and doer of everything. She was instrumental in getting the leisure centre up and open again last week when we had the issues. So she is here to present, I think, the bulk of the paper today. And of course, Steve, everyone knows Steve, who leads the communities team. Before I hand over to Steve, I just wanted to note that there is a slight inaccuracy in the title of the paper, which Councillor Wallace brought to my attention. Thank you. It ought to refer to the Winchester City Council owned leisure centres that are managed under the contract with Everyone Active, because of course we do also have the Swanmore Leisure Centre, which is located at Swanmore College, which is within the district and was funded in part by the council. I'm invited to, and I have attended the management committee of that leisure centre, and I've checked with officers and they would be happy to work with Swanmore Leisure Centre to try and capture similar data to that which is included within this paper, and present a similar report at a future meeting. So I hope that satisfies Councillor Wallace. Thank you. So over to Steve.
Thank you, Chair. So this report introduces the findings of some work undertaken to calculate the social value generated by Winchester Sport and Leisure Park and Meadowside Leisure Centre. Both the Sport and Leisure Park and Meadowside have been under Everyone Active's operation for over 2 years, with both use of both sites continuing to grow and the contract performing well. This report is not about contract performance though. That's managed in line with the council's contract management framework, with KPIs, priorities and targets set and reviewed on an annual basis, reported to the council through regular monthly monitoring meetings and quarterly advisory board meetings. This report is about social value. That's not something that Everyone Active is contractually required to report, but which it does voluntarily. It gives us really valuable perspective on the added value that the contract delivers, and it helps us understand the extent to which the contract truly contributes to the wider health outcomes of the district. The really positive message here is that the Sport and Leisure Park generated social value of just over £3.5 million last year. These figures reflect activity levels within the centre, within both our centres, and the Sport and Leisure Park in particular places second within EA's entire portfolio of 220 facilities, so something for us to be really proud of there. Meadowside figures obviously considerably smaller, reflecting the nature of Meadowside and what goes on there, but we're still really proud of them both. And like they say, the figures there just reflect a very different scale and type of facility. So Everyone Active's report demonstrates that the contract's delivering far more than just access to sport. It shows a clear alignment with the council's wider priorities to tackle health inequalities in the district. And so now I'll just pass over to Alison Lewis from Everyone Active, who's just going to explain a little bit more about Everyone Active's interest in social value, what it tells them about their business.
Thank you, Steve. Good evening, everybody. So I'm delighted really to be talking about social value because we've had such a really lovely kind of figure to be talking about in such a short space of time. And just to give you a little bit of a background on social values, it's been around since about 2015, the social value calculator. It was developed in partnership with 4Global, Sheffield Hallam University and Experian. And I think it was felt that there was a need to try and monetize the benefits that sports and activity has on the health and well-being of the community. And that's kind of the base of how it works. The social value data is fed into Sport England moving communities, and that councils have access to that in terms of seeing how facilities are performing and how they can benchmark those with other facilities and other councils. I believe that's something that EA don't have access to, but I know councils do at that level. The most interesting thing about social value, I think, is the way that we can look at it and we can use it to compare how we're performing against other facilities, how our programmes are impacting the local area and the local people that live within it. And if there are any things that we can improve and change. And I think that one of the most attractive things that's come out of this is that we clearly know that getting people through the door will have a benefit to their health. Once they're through the door, by we check through whichever partner we work with or programmes of our own, the key is getting them more active. So the indicator for social value and where we score the most pounds, if you like, is getting people active for over 150 minutes. I think in my report, I referenced our group exercise contingent, who are very loyal people. They come 3 or 4 times a week, and they're probably doing 300 minutes of activity. So that means that we score really highly on those types of activities. People that are coming through our GP referral programmes, it's really great to see those people that are introduced to activity and then moving into maybe a fitness membership, and then making sure they're coming more than once a week, twice a week, 3 times a week, just to sort of make sure we're getting that impact. The report also talks about where that monetary value kind of sits in our, I think I've used which is Sport Leisure Park as an example, and that £3.8 million. So it is against preventing future injury, so long-term health conditions, the social benefits, and the age indicator is 16 plus. So are 16 plus year olds coming to the leisure centre rather than doing things they shouldn't outside and about? So it's kind of diversionary activity and the benefits of that, and also how that might impact their future in terms of improving their chances of getting meaningful work or continuing education. So it is quite an interesting, you can see that I'm quite enthusiastic about it. I've done quite a lot of work on it, so it is a very interesting subject, and we are moving in the right direction. Last year we had about 3.5 million in terms of social return on investment, and this year it's gone up to 3.8. So we are definitely moving in the right directions, and it will only improve. So that is it in a nutshell from me.
Thank you, Alison. That's great. Right, we'll open it up to the floor for questions. Councillor Bolton, you're first.
So thank you for that. So I read through the paper on the social value, and there's a bit of a black box thing going on there, where sort of all this input seems to go in, and then it springs this 3.8 million, and I can't knit the bits together. And it, there's all the bit about various consequential illness and all this sort of thing that are common with inactive individuals, and clearly we know now that certain activities are beneficial to those illnesses, but I couldn't quite sort of work out where all the levers were going within all that. And I say that because, and you mentioned that it's not a measure that we're monitoring within the contract. And so I'd like to understand what drives you to get higher numbers there, because if there's no benefit to you, then it's just an interesting number, and I couldn't quite work out what the drivers were and why you'd want that to be better. Because sometimes with that sort of thing, there's unintended consequences where it might be if there was some sense of financial benefit to you for driving single mothers groups or something and having them free access to certain things, then if you're getting a big benefit on one side because of that with this social value indicator, and that is something that matters to you, then certain things happen that are better for the community. And the unintended consequences are when actually it just drives you to try and put the price up overall to a point where you just get the right number, you know. So I'm trying to understand what the levers are that drive a positive outcome overall and how it affects you. Yeah.
I think I've understood your question. So this is really just an added bonus to what we're doing, the work we do with the council, if you like. So the health and wellbeing plan sets out all of our targets in terms of participation, footfall. This is doing is providing a monetary value of the impact, the health benefits of those activities. So it is just an add-on. You mentioned about pricing has nothing to do with calculating social value.
So that would have a definite effect on the number of people, because if it were too expensive, then your membership would drop and then your social value would go through the floor, wouldn't it, presumably?
I'm not quite sure how to respond to that, sorry.
I guess my take on it, there's clearly a correlation between the numbers of people coming through the door, or the numbers of people coming through the door directly impact both Everyone Active's kind of contractual performance, but also the social value. The more people that are coming through the door, the more people are receiving this health benefit, which clearly pushes up the social value. So I think if I've understood right, Alison's absolutely right that the value here that we're talking about, the 3.5 million, the 3.8 million, don't have any direct relation to, if you like, Everyone Active's financial performance. I guess what it's doing is it's, as an industry, and I think you started off by saying, as an industry, what it's doing is it's kind of reinforcing the value of the work that they do. So when it comes down to funders, decision makers, I guess what this is doing is demonstrating that, you know, it's not just about financial performance. This has a wider social benefit, and actually the 3.5 or 3.8 million, the benefit there is actually not to Everyone Active, it's to the public purse. This is to the primary health care, this is to sort of secondary health services, mental health support services. In a way, that's what that value is. That's value that's being added to those public services by people with some of these conditions not being driven into needing those services. I don't know if that helps, or if that does answer the question, but that's kind of how I take it.
I mean, I think the simple answer is that, you know, if the price goes up too much, the number of people drop, the membership starts to sink, and that's a factor in this algorithm. I don't know quite how it works, but it's clearly a factor, and the social value would collapse at some point. So it sort of does answer it, but I'm still sort of not quite there on what relevance the social value. It's relevant to us because we want to see social value to our community, but I'm unclear how that's driving you to perform better, to increase social value, is what I'm getting at.
So our KPI, I'm just going to go back to the contracts and the KPIs we have in the contract. So we set annual kind of footfall targets, and there's a growth every year. And this year we've set a target of 5% growth compared to last year. Part of Everyone Active's brand philosophy is getting people more active more often in our leisure centres. So for me, this all fits in with the way that social value works, and it's a good byproduct of, if you like, of the things that we do on a day-to-day basis, what we've signed up for with the council in terms of a contract, and we're getting this great benefit to the community, and savings to the NHS and everything else. So I think it does join up. Although I take your point, I'm not targeted on social value, but there's a huge amount of competition now within our company of which site's got the greatest social values, and it drives us all to be more creative and making sure that we have got more people coming through the door. So it's kind of joins things up, really, I think.
And sorry, just have one more thing. I think one of the things that members rightly challenge us as the council team who manage the contracts and Alison and Everyone Active in terms of delivery is around how we're making sure we're hitting those people that aren't your typical 5 days a week, already within that category of doing 150 minutes a week. And in a way, this is one measure which helps demonstrate that, because clearly the social value that comes from getting some of the less healthy, less active people through the door accelerates this or increases the social value by a greater amount, if that makes sense. So this is a good way of reflecting that, which is one of the things we often struggle a little bit to do. We can count numbers through the door, but sometimes just numbers through the door doesn't paint the true picture of the value that comes out of that. So this is one way which I think is really helpful, and like I say, we rightly get challenged by members to try and demonstrate how we're helping those people that need the help the most, and this partly does that.
Thank you for that. Councillor Warwick, you have a question.
Yeah, thank you. And it sort of follows on quite nicely. So I go to the leisure centre quite often, and your demographic mix is really good. So I know you have a stroke class and it's just really impressive to see 20 or 30 people struggling to get up to that class, and they find their way. But it's really rewarding. And they go get their nails done, then they go and have a coffee. It's fantastic to see that. And I guess your drivers are Sport England, that Energise Me, and our public health strategy, which is all about getting people more active, improving the quality of life. And it's qualities that, there's a sort of health service measurement of quality of life. But how are you targeting the sort of, we're trying to get older people active, and there is a fair range, but do you have groups that you need to target more, and how do you go about doing that? So how do you increase the number of elderly who are perhaps using the leisure centre?
We're really blessed in Winchester with our 50 plus club, and they've got 600 members, so they're very well catered for. It's good program they have. All of that data goes into our usage figures and everything else, so fairly well represented. We've got I think the brand's inclusive. We are working with lots of different partners to try and target different demographics. You mentioned the stroke group. We've got dementia cafe, working with St John's now. Lots of different partnerships. NHS is really kind of developing, and that's the way I think things will progress, by using and working with external partners to sort of make those inroads. And things have come on dramatically since we opened. It really has. I don't know if you've seen our health and wellbeing programme, but some of the things we're delivering now and the numbers we're getting through the door is incredible. So.
Can I just add something to that quickly? So your question about targeting a specific age group, I just kind of wanted to highlight that actually the good thing about the leisure centre, it has a quality is very high. I would say every demographic is hit well, and the centre are always looking at how they can make sure that everyone has opportunity to a really good offer, whatever it is that you're looking to achieve on site. So yes, there are target groups, but in reality, the target is everyone.
I'm just going to jump in there as well to say that one of the things that we do look at our quarterly meetings is the breakdown of the demographics of who is coming to the centre. Are there groups that we're missing that we need to target more? So that is part of the discussion that we have with EA and with the wider team.
Okay, Councillor Greenberg.
Thank you very much. I wanted to say that I'm a doctor, so I found it really interesting and useful actually to see a numerical value put on the benefit of exercise. And I think it's a really great good news story. I was really pleased to see some of that. I've not seen that sort of analysis before. So that was great. And what I understand this is me harping on about the same thing, but what work does Everyone Active do to try and encourage your members to walk or cycle to the centre rather than to drive there? Because obviously if we can encourage people to be active getting that, not only does it help us with other things we've been talking about today, but also it helps with the amount of social value and the amount of activity. Thank you.
Thank you. We do have a green travel plan that was submitted as part of the kind of planning conditions. There is definitely green, work to be done. We're just working with Anna Heron at the council. So we're just about to launch a green travel survey to our customers and staff to find out a little bit more about how they get to the centre. So that's kind of starting point. So there'll be that'll be launching in the next week, and we'll have that will run for about 6 weeks, and then we'll collate that data, and then I think we'll start to do some real work on it. But no, I think there is definitely room for improvement in that regard. Just being honest.
I might be overstepping but it would be good to think about linking up some infrastructure to you and making that quite logical, kind of easy way to get to the centre. So any collaboration on that, given other things we've talked about as well, would be really great. Thank you.
I think Councillor Tippett-Cooper is up next.
No, I'm very interested to see this too, and I think the answer potentially to Councillor Bolton's question is what's in it for you, Everyone Active. Is that, well, I don't want to get too philosophical here, but what's the point in any private company if that hasn't got a purpose and a vision? And clear Everyone Active's vision is to make everyone active, and this helps kind of put meat to the bones of the actual benefit that it's delivering as a company, which I know it motivates employees. It provides, like I say, that vision and purpose for the entire company. So I understand exactly why you'd want to do sort of set this out. I was just picking up on something in the paper about the visitors numbers are absolutely astonishing and really a credit to both the council and Everyone Active in terms of getting figures up to 751,000 visitors at the Winchester Sportage Centre in year 2 is really impressive. I did note that there has been swimming lesson numbers have fallen slightly this year, and that's a priority area for improvement. So the question is how's that? What's the plan of Everyone Active to address that firstly? And I also acknowledge that there's huge amounts of pressure on you in terms of increasing costs. And I know there was recent concern about the increase for under 2s for swimming lessons. And I was just wondering whether, if things improve in terms of cost base, if things improve in terms of numbers, whether there's a possibility of reviewing whether that under 2s going free again could come back in for Everyone Active. So those are my 2 questions.
Just remind me of your first question. Sorry, you had 2 questions, didn't you? Just remind me of your first question. Swimming lessons, yeah, sorry. So we did take a bit of a dip. We've had some challenges in terms of recruitment. We've discussed it at length throughout our advisory boards. It was an industry-wide issue. Lifeguards, swimming teachers were very difficult to come by. And we've turned a corner. But as a result, the schemes kind of remain static or kind of gone slightly backwards. There's a fair amount of competition in Winchester in terms of swimming provision. We've got kind of really detailed growth plans in place now. We've got a really strong team.
So there's no reason why we can't turn a corner. We're hoping to have that number up to kind of around 1,600 in the next kind of 12 months, which is great growth. We had huge growth at the start, and then it's kind of plateaued off. In terms of costs, you know, across the industry, under 5 swimming was looked at. Number of operators have were either charging or they've introduced charges. So it's something that we've had to look at. You know, we don't like increasing prices, but it is, you know, the kind of reality. We haven't had that much feedback about it. We've had a few comments. Most people understand the challenges that companies face these days. You know, we've got increased staffing costs, utility costs, equipment costs. I think most people are, you know, understanding in that regard, and it is a minimal increase. It's a minimum amount to pay. So it's £2 for that kind of age group, and we haven't really had to do too much else. But you know, the reality of it is that everything is going up in price for operators too. So.
And sorry, just to reinforce, so from the council perspective, just in case it's not clear, that those charges are sort of wholly within the charges strategy that was set out in the sort of the contract. So you know, it's not that Everyone Active's doing something that you know was not part of the contractual sort of proposal. So.
I'd say one thing, just coming back to the swimming lessons, I think it's just important to remember, you probably would have heard some of this potentially at council questions last night. Although we're talking about there is a slight drop off in swimming lessons at the moment, I think it's important to remember that swimming lessons currently going through Winchester Sport and Leisure Park for operators are double what they were from River Park. So we have still seen growth within swimming lessons. It's simply, you know, there is kind of capacity to do more. And then just picking up on Steve's point about the fees and, you know, the charges for under twos being within the contractual obligation, that the ability to do that has been in place since the beginning of the contract. So we are, another way to look at it is we are fortunate that we haven't had those charges in for 2 years of the contract, because it has been within EA's gift to be able to do that. That's all I wanted to say.
Okay, I'm going to jump in here with a question, but also a comment, I guess, mixing debate and question, a bit naughty really. I'm really intrigued with the concept of social value. I think it's an interesting concept that you've presented to us. As with any metric, I think it may take a few iterations before we'll kind of wrap our heads around what it's useful for, what it's not useful for, and so on. But I guess the specific question I had, it's a nice simple question, but I wanted to frame it in that way, is when you have a metric, you inevitably create league tables. I mean, that if you're active, you get competitive. Well, not everyone, but we are a tendency to get competitive. We want to be top of the league. We want to be top of the squash ladder, whatever it is. We want to be top of it. And so when I was looking at the numbers, I was, you know, looking at where we stood on the total social value. We had a good, well, the Winchester Leisure Park in Winchester was right up there, really good, makes you feel good. But there's so many factors, like the size of the population, that will affect that. So I kind of think maybe a metric which is the per population, per visitor, which you've got in there, is perhaps a more useful one to be benchmarking. But then I thought, but what about Meadowside? So what that metric shows is that Meadowside is well down the ladder compared with, even on the per visitor, compared with the Sports and Leisure Park. Is that good? Is that bad? I don't know how to wrap my head around it. The simplistic thing says, well, it's much lower. We've got to focus on that. But maybe there's other reasons why it's lower. So could you just sort of perhaps give me some colour around how to interpret the differences in the two numbers? Thank you.
Thank you. I think I've done a bit of analysis on some of those top 10 and the type of facilities they are. If you look at Harrow Lodge, which is, I think, number one, it's over 4.3 million for a site in our portfolio. It's a bigger site than Winchester Sport and Leisure Park. So it is all about footfall and then making sure people are multi-active in the types of programmes they've got in there, which I think we're very similar on. But if you've got greater footfall through a facility, you're going to score higher on the social value calculator. Meadowside's footfall is a lot lower. It's a small site. The facilities are a lot less than a big swimming pool site, and it's as simple as that. That said, I think we are sitting slightly below on the national average, so there is things that can be done. We've got challenges in terms of data capture there. We haven't got access barriers like I've got at Winchester, so it's a case of somebody physically showing their card in the gym or at the reception. Some of the groups we have, some of the really great parent groups that we have there, we're not gathering their data, and I think I've made a point later on in the paper about the importance of trying to gather the data of partners that we work with so we can improve those scores, because Whiteley's a very community-based facility. In the way that the activities are set up there is a lot of them are delivered by partners, and we haven't got that data. So we are already conscious of that, and I think that now we know a bit more about social value and how it's calculated, we can do the work to improve Whiteley. So.
And so if I can, Chair, just to add to that, I think for those people that sort of know Meadowside very well, it's a very different type of facility. And obviously I don't know Everyone Active's portfolio of 220 facilities, but it comes 145th and 145th in that list. So it's not kind of bottom quartile. And I would hazard a guess that in terms of, if you like, scale and size and what's not for that, it possibly is in bottom quartile. So it feels a little bit like it probably is a bit of an assumption here, but it feels like it's maybe punching above its weight in that respect. And also those figures that there's some figures under section 4.2 of Alison's report that just show that even given it as a relatively small community-based centre, it's still the social value is still above the national average that's showing. So it kind of feels like it's reflective of the type of facility that it is, and actually it still feels like it's in comparison to what it is. It's actually performing really well in social value terms. So,
yes, I'm glad, Steve, you drew attention at the end towards the national averages per person, because I think that's the more relevant metric. Meadowside is never going to be anywhere up the top of the list when you've got those huge sites, especially fantastically new ones like our one. So Meadowside can't compete in that. And that's just, if you like, the warning about having numbers end up with people putting them in tables and potentially drawing the wrong conclusions. That's just the risk. Whereas I think the per person metric is probably better, but still subject to that risk. But as I say, I think it's great that they have that metric, and look forward to how it develops. Shall we move into debate, as I've already started talking in debate? Is that a debate question or a question? Is that a debate or a question? Question. We'll have a question.
I'll keep it brief and I won't debate. It's probably a question more for the officers, but it's as you said, the national average for Winchester is the SVC per person is doing very well. It's very impressive. But what I remember of my statistics GCSE, that's a self-selecting sample. That's out of the people who go to the actual centre themselves and access it. And obviously, because it's an amenity for the whole city, I'm just asking whether we are collecting demographic data on how it is used by different areas of the city. Because obviously, when I knock on doors in Week and Hasdock, they just say they can't get there anymore because it's on the other side of the city, and it's no matter how great it is, if they can't use it, it's not a great amenity for the city. So I'm just asking, is that data being collected as well?
we do have, yeah, we do have that data, and I think it's something, again, we've discussed this. It's been discussed, I think, probably here in the past, and it's something that we can do more with. So yes, absolutely. I mean, what this sort of calculation doesn't do is obviously reflect, you know, the sort of the geographical demographics of a place like Winchester, or not the demographic, the geographical distance of a place like Winchester. But what it does do is clearly it picks up the nature of the demographics of people coming. So the algorithms and things behind the calculation that comes to the 3.5 million does reflect the nature of the people that are coming in. So it definitely reflects demographic. There's definitely more work we can do, and we've talked with Alison about that in terms of at the local level, how do we make sure that, you know, those people who aren't coming, who for various reasons, some of it geographical, some of it lifestyle and other things, that, you know, we do what we can to do that. There's actually, I think there is an awful lot that does get done, and Alison mentioned some of the schemes and the programs that are done to engage people who aren't your normal leisure centre goers, but there's always more that we can do, definitely.
Okay, thank you. I think let's just move into the debate phase if we're going to have any debate. I know we've commented as we've gone. Anyone want to make any comments? Okay, I'm seeing lots of shakes of the head, which suggests that we're getting beyond 9 o'clock. So if I could just thank you for, thank you, Alison, in particular, because this is an EA initiative. I know it's been supported by officers, but there is an element of risk in exposing this kind of stuff. So I'd like you to thank you for sharing that. I think it's an intriguing metric. I think we on this side need to learn how to interpret it. No doubt, you know, you'll be evolving how you use it and how you present it. I can see it has the potential to help councils potentially defend some of the funding and investment in sports and other leisure facilities. So I think in that sense, it's something that's very useful, and it should, you know, it goes beyond just counting revenue through the gate. And I think it hints that actually there's more social value in getting certain types of people through the gate than your classic, am I allowed to use this phrase, gym bunny, who will just go through the gate anyway and be in there 5 days a week. I have to confess, I've probably been to the leisure centre more times for a coffee than I have to actually exercise. But in my defence, I probably spend 10 hours a week on a bike elsewhere. So I'm not completely a couch potato. So thank you very much for bringing that to us, and thank you to you, Steve, and the other. Sorry, Brian's gone. Laura and Kathleen for introducing the paper to us. Thank you. Oh, I've got some recommendations. I have just, by the next meeting, I would have got this. Now, I don't have to read them out, do I? So I think the members of the committee have noted the recommendations, and hopefully we have explored the subject in sufficient depth. So thank you again. Right. I think this is the last item on the agenda. And this is to note the work programme for the rest of this municipal year. I think I hand over to Mrs. Adey to just talk us through that.
Thank you, Chair. You've got the work programme in front of you here, includes today's items. So if we look at the next meeting for the 5th of December, you have 4 items, including a speaker invited who's yet to confirm. They can definitely come, so that one's to be confirmed. So quite a full agenda for December, and 1 item on there for February 24. And added to your work programme was the table that Councillor Crimoisen referred to at the top of the meeting with regards to the items you discussed at the end of last meeting, and whether they needed work programmes to come here or whether they would be seen elsewhere. So that's there for your information.
Thank you, Mrs. Adey. And if I could thank Claire and yourself for valiantly capturing all those items that we raised in the brainstorm. Several items have actually been covered, as I noted in the earlier comments. And I'm aware that Councillor Brophy is following up on the EV points in areas where people don't have street items. So thank you. The next meeting of Health and Environment Policy Committee is on the 5th, as per the work plan. If I could thank everyone for attending today and for raising interesting questions and probing each of the subjects. And thank you for officers who have stayed right through, and other and portfolio holders for staying through to the end of the meeting. And the time is about 4 minutes past 9, and we'll close the meeting. And I should use my gavel, shouldn't I?